So the first thing I want to do is just take a moment to introduce Amy Storer. She is an intelligence analyst for Homeland Security. Previously, she worked at Washington, D.C. With the collective national experience at the National Targeting Center and Tactical Intelligence Cell. The most important thing about Amy is she is an incredible advocate for human trafficking and an incredible advocate for Irex, and we just cannot be more excited to have her today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Amy.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I am very honored to be here. I remember when I first heard from Irex and I heard about the incredible technology that they have developed to hopefully use for the greater good to find and rescue missing children. This technology is a facial detection system that can be put into any video surveillance camera around the world. In the United States, we have the highest volume of missing children each year. Almost 500,000 children each year go missing. Many are never found. This technology would give eyes an instant real-time alert in as many cameras that are signed up for this incredible technology. For me, I am, as Derek mentioned, I work for Homeland Security. I work on child exploitation and human trafficking cases, but also I am a professor and a researcher, and I speak today from the heart on a topic that I think is the greatest crisis actually in world history, the terrible situation with human slavery and child exploitation. So to start off, I will be going through some of the basic facts about the current status of human trafficking. As many of you all know, there are about 20 to 40 million slaves in the world today, human slaves. They're generating $150 billion each year. Traffickers are generating off the backs of these slaves, sex and labor trafficking. What a lot of people don't realize is 1 in 4 of these slaves are actually children. Human trafficking calls have soared and have raised almost 259% in this country since the year 2008. So we've had a raise of 259% of human trafficking incidents reported since the year 2008. So clearly, the problem is continuing to grow in enormous levels. There are several reasons for that, which I will later discuss. During the first 48 hours, most of these missing children are approached by a trafficker. 60% of these missing children that were later found actually reported within the first 48 hours they were approached and recruited by a trafficker. 1 in 4 children are now sexually abused in the world, which is incredibly unfortunate. And there is a big connection between sexual abuse and human trafficking of children, which I will discuss in the next slide. To look at the magnitude of this problem, in the year 2019 alone, there were 16.9 million child exploitation tips reported to the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, 16.9 million. As a Homeland Security professional, you can imagine how overwhelming this number is. It shows the magnitude of this crime. There are not enough prisons in the world. There are not enough investigators. There are so many children continuing to be abused and tortured, actually, physically, sexually, and emotionally. The MIT University just recently did a study that showed 1 in 5 children have actually received sexual grooming messages on the internet from strangers, which does not surprise me from my line of work. In fact, one example that really shocked me to my core was a particular case where I just wanted to add, I was working a child exploitation case and I needed to add a target just to see what was on his basic profile, which I couldn't see. So I tried to add him, but he wouldn't add me back. So I made a new profile depicting a 10-year-old girl, a fake profile. And of course, he added me back. I saw what I needed to find on his profile and I went about my day. About a month later, I signed back on to get some other information. And I was shocked to see that I had over 100 different ads from disgusting men across the country trying to add and talk to and send flirtatious messages to this 10-year-old girl. And I just remember feeling so enraged by that and thinking, unbelievable how in 1 month time, this is really, I believe 1 in 5 children, I believe that statistic is actually much higher that are receiving these messages. The account I had created was very simple, just a few pictures of a 10-year-old child, and these were over 100 ads from these men and messages. I'm sorry to say, but if you're messaging a 10-year-old child and you're a man that doesn't know the child, chances are you are a predator. Unfortunately, there is nothing we can do about that with the law, which is why we need anti-grooming legislation, which I will get to in my next slide. So there's a big intersection between child exploitation and human trafficking. The days of regular child exploitation incidents are really changing with the level of the slave trade, and pedophiles are finding ways to decide to actually not just molest the child, but sell the child and make money. One of the first cases I worked, this disgusting man was sexually abusing his disabled child. The poor child had autism and other disabilities and was impaired and couldn't walk very well, and he was sexually abusing this child. I remember feeling that I needed to get his money somehow. And I ordered his MoneyGram transactions. And when I opened the records, it shocked me to my core what I found: continuous $20 transactions from various different men. And obviously right away, I knew what was going on. Not only was he sexually abusing his disabled child, but he was selling his child to men across the country to travel and exploit for the grand price of $20. That's what that child was worth to him. So there is a big intersection here, very disgusting, very disturbing. We always have to look for the money. So when we're talking about human trafficking, almost all victims have been sexually abused as a child. Okay, 75% actually of child sex trafficking victims, of human trafficking victims, child sex trafficking victims have been previously abused as a child. So 75%, about 3 of 4 have reported that they have also been exploited as a child. That makes sense because what happens? The child runs away, and that's when the trafficker picks them up, right, and recruits them on the streets. Very tragically, the FBI did a study where it showed 60% of all child sex trafficking victims came from the foster care system. So you know exactly who these traffickers are preying upon. And by the way, this technology that Irex is promoting is not just for missing children, but also runaways who do not have parents that care for them, who do not have parents that even report that they've been missing. But one person cares out there, and law enforcement cares. Even if these children don't have parents who care, don't even have a caretaker who cares, I care, and we care, and we're going to help them, and we're going to find them. So very tragically, one of the cases that I learned about from a really great agent in Alabama office, it was called Operation Home for Christmas. And they realized that if we have a missing child, and if the child happens to have a criminal record, we can go up on their phone and wiretap and find out where they are and locate and rescue them, only if they have a criminal record. It's a stipulation in the law. So they decided to go ahead and do that, unite families at Christmas time, really exciting, right? And he told me they identified every one of them. They found them. And I said, well, that's so great. Well, what happened? And he said, well, pretty sad that they tried to call the parents and the parents didn't want them. So you can see why these children end up in the hands of these traffickers. You can see how these traffickers recruit them. You know, if you have parents that love you and you grew up with that background, you are very lucky. But unfortunately, these predators prey on children and give them affection and give them toys and give them these things that they've never had. And that's how they end up becoming their slaves. Every 2 minutes, a child is sexually exploited or trafficked in the world. Very, very sad. You know, and so I think really we need to see the intersection of these crimes. So we're looking at COVID. Obviously, the world has been devastated with COVID. So how has COVID impacted the human slave trade? You know, I felt a little bit optimistic in one way. I thought, you know, there might be some silver lining to COVID. Maybe human trafficking will go down and people will be afraid, and these traffickers might actually care about spreading the virus, and maybe let these poor victims be safe, and the community, and you know, wishful thinking, of course, because that's not what happened. It actually got much worse. And part of that is the financial struggle. Immediately I started, when the shutdown happened, my biggest concern was who was going to shut down first. Young girls working in bartenders, right? Bars, restaurants. So young girls, single moms that don't have much money. So what are they going to do? They're going to go and try to find some work. They're going to try to find some other job. And so I started to notice immediately, as I suspected, a whole bunch of Craigslist ads, which I pretty soon detected were human traffickers recruiting specifically these young girls. And I could do some research and pretty quickly tell that these were trafficking situations. So again, very concerning when you have people struggling the financial side, and then also single moms wanting childcare, and there are predators advertising on Craigslist to watch children, to drive children. Of course, there are good people that are still out there too, but that is something that is a big time concern with the crisis. So I'm the proudest American you've ever met in your life. I'm very patriotic. But one thing I'm very ashamed about is the United States is the leading producer and consumer of child sex abuse material online. And we're also the top 3 nations in the world for national origin of human trafficking victims, next to the Philippines and Mexico, 2 third world countries. Pretty terrible. That was a 2020 statistic back in April by the Associated Press. Human trafficking, when it comes to COVID, human trafficking calls actually doubled during the COVID lockdown. So calls to the human trafficking center doubled during that time. And in fact, their emergency hotline actually doubled as well. People needing emergency assistance for human trafficking situations. There was a 98% increase in online enticement reports in the year 2020 compared to that same period in 2019. We're talking from January through September during the COVID crisis. So almost 100% double increase from the National Child of Missing and Exploited Children in online enticement reports. They also had, I think it was a 63% in overall child exploitation tip line reports during that same period. So again, you can see how the internet and the enticement and the trafficking online is going to be impacted by COVID. Kids are not in school. Most concerning for me is the fact that child victims are most oftentimes being abused by someone within the home. In fact, 78% of child exploitation victims are being abused by a parent. An additional 4% are being abused by a girlfriend or boyfriend of the parent living within the home. So really you have over 80% of victims being abused by somebody within their household. So now what happens, you have the lockdown in Georgia. Our state opened first. It was only 6 weeks. So we were kind of lucky to be open sooner. Other states, heard in Miami, they were closed 3 months. These children are stuck at home with their predators and they're not going to school. And many times we get those cries for help because of our very diligent teachers and childcare workers who notice signs of abuse and who are able to detect things are not right. okay, or children say something, right, to somebody, a cry for help. So that was another major concern for me. And my big prediction was that once children go back to school, that the hotline again will skyrocket because kids will start saying something to a teacher, right? And that will alert us to that activity. So in the European Union, they also reported a 30% hike in child sexual abuse material online demand during COVID. So what I'd like to talk about next are the different types of pimps that are very powerful in recruiting victims. And one such victim said that, you know, her pimp bought her first birthday cake. She's never had a birthday cake. Really, affection is a drug to the deprived, people that have not had anybody care for them. They've never been recognized for a birthday. They've never had anything like that. I put a few very disgusting pictures up of the way these victims are branded with barcodes, actually selling a human, right? I've seen slave auctions. I've seen situations where I all of a sudden see the sex ads change on a victim I'm tracking. The language changed, the picture changes, the location changes, and then I see a big, huge deposit, and I realize what just happened. She was literally sold off in a slave auction to another trafficker who took over. And they do this, it's very disgusting. You think that we fought a civil war to end the slave trade, and here we have slave auctions going on in this country. I met with a survivor the other night for dinner, and she actually told me about a slave auction that she actually witnessed in Bulgaria. Very concerning, very unbelievable, really, that this is happening. So there are three different types of pimps, and I teach human trafficking at Savannah State University as a professor. And you know, one of the ways that I like to study this is to look at the different recruitment tactics. And so we have the Romeo pimp, which is, of course, the one that will romance the victim, make them feel like they are a real Casanova, make them feel like they are the only woman in the world, and they're feeling so romanced and everything. And then they end up becoming trafficked by that person. So that is a very common one. You also have the opportunity, the CEO pimp, which is very common for international trafficking, promising an amazing job, an amazing career. And then, of course, they are going to become sex or labor trafficked. And a lot of times I actually do see both sex and labor trafficking intermixed. There was a particular farm case I was helping an agent with that involved these really terrible, these farmers being labor trafficked like slaves in these fields. And I noticed there was also a bunch of females in the transactions, and I noticed there was a lot of different activity with females, which I don't often see in labor trafficking cases on farms. So I mentioned it, and I started looking into it. Come to find out, these traffickers were facilitating sex trafficking of these Mexican females to provide to their labor slaves. So they were really feeding their slaves with slaves. Pretty unbelievable strategy there. That is, I don't even know how they think of these horrific things. The third category that is the type of pimp is a guerrilla pimp, which basically scares their victims and with brute force beatings. There's a case that involved traffickers literally pounding victims with hammers. That is unbelievable what these poor victims went through. And basically they use brute force to essentially coerce them and force them into doing whatever they can do to become to make money as their slaves. One of the victims that I spoke with, she told me that she actually was locked into this particular brothel in Holland. She was trafficked from Bulgaria and locked into this brothel in Holland, where prostitution, by the way, is legal. So the argument that legalizing prostitution is very much debunked, because the levels of trafficking in those regions are extremely high. So she was trafficked by this man who was a Romeo pimp. She was basically starved. They had the pimps were in control of all the money. She was scared for her family's life. She told me the reason why she didn't leave was she didn't know the language. They took her passport, of course. She had no way of communicating with the outside world at all. And the traffickers told her that if she tries to escape, they will kill her family. And I asked her, do you believe they would kill your family? And she said, absolutely. She said, these were the most violent pimps. She said, she starved for 2 weeks, didn't eat. They were just drugged up on cocaine and speed to keep them moving, to keep them having sex after sex. And she was in this terrible situation for 10 years. And unfortunately, she basically hit rock bottom, and actually one of the Johns saved her life and actually asked her a question, why are you doing this? And she finally said, I want to leave and I'm scared. And he helped her escape through a window. So there are some good people in the world, but we really need to fight this. This is a horrific, horrific crime. I can't imagine what she went through. There's actually pimp handbooks that these pimps make. They are master manipulators. You might think to yourself, why in the world would these victims never leave? I mean, this is the land of the free, just walk away. It's unbelievable the tactics they use. One of the quotes from the pimp diary is, promise them heaven and they will follow you to hell. And very tragically, that's what they do. They promise these young girls all of these great things. We're going to buy you a house. We're going to do this. If you just meet your quota, then you can get a new car, all of this stuff. Then we'll let you free. And of course, it's all a lie. So we have a very high need for partnerships and new technology. I want to be more proactive versus reactive in this fight. It seems that we are sort of making laws reactively. We're sort of being too reactive in this terrible situation. Very sadly, Congress is not seeing the dire urgency of this problem. I wish they would. They're chipping away at law enforcement's ability to find victims, as well as the private sector. Facebook now wants to do end-to-end encryption. We have a law that is trying to be passed to prevent law enforcement from using any type of facial detection system, which would be extremely detrimental to our ability to find these victims. And I was thinking to myself that in the judicial branch of government, the judge has to see the evidence before making a ruling. I think so too should Congress before making legislation. And I would like them to come back into our labs and see these child sex torture chambers and see these horrible things happening to these children and try telling us that you want to ban us from facial detection technology. It would be a complete abomination of justice. So the private sector is really favoring privacy before victims. One of the arguments I like to make is victims also deserve privacy, do they not? And their rape videos are getting spewed all over the darknet. We have uphill battles in all ways to get this information, to get results, to get the private sector to answer us, to get them to hurry it up, to get them to respond in a timely manner. And they're not seeing the urgency in my experience. I have very few contacts that I rely upon. If anybody here is watching and is able to help, I would love to have a faster contact that actually cares and wants to work with us. The amount of red tape and paperwork involved is enormous. We have to get a subpoena for every little information. We have to get a gag order from the judge, or they're going to disclose to the user on every single child exploitation case. They say, unless it's hands-on. Well, my thing is this: if it's child exploitation, how do I know as a law enforcement officer that it's hands-on? Because I guarantee you, these people will act if they are in the opportunity to do so. And so I wish we could lessen the red tape as well. I wish we could have a swifter way of doing things. I do have some companies, very few, that will respond to me with email requests on these human slavery and child exploitation matters, but they are far and few between. I actually remember my one of my first cases. I used to work terrorism in DC, and I really wanted to make a bigger impact in my career. And so I moved to do human trafficking in the Georgia office. And one of the it was my first day, of course, on the job, and I didn't have a computer. I didn't have, you know, how it is in the government. You're just getting set up and everything. And I remember asking my boss at the time, you know, what's the biggest case you've got going right now? You know, give me some information. I'm really excited and couldn't wait to make a difference. And every single day, I want to make an impact, no matter what. Even if I don't have a computer, I'm going to find a way to make an impact. And so he told me about the case, that this was a terrible human slavery case where a victim was actually murdered in our jurisdiction. And these girls, it was like a cult. It was a gang cult. These girls would actually pray to this guy. They were so brainwashed by him. These young girls, the tragic murder of this poor woman. She was a young Native American girl. The last post on her Facebook was, "Daddy is gonna get me that house I've always dreamed of." And of course that was a lie. But it was very, very tragic. But so it was my first day, and I remember the boss telling me, well, he dumped his phone. The trafficker dumped his phone. He's fled. We don't know where he's at. He's gone. We haven't been able to trace him since he's dumped his phones. And so I just remember like sitting at my desk and thinking, I was so disturbed by what I had just heard. And I don't know what drove me to do it, because I could never get this lucky again. But something inside me said to pick up the phone, and I called a particular airline, the first one that came to mind, and I was just driven to do it. And the person that answered, I said, I had never made a subpoena in my life. I wouldn't even know how to do it. I was just brand new. And I said, well, this is an urgent situation. We have a human trafficking situation with a murder. I just want to know if this man is coming back to Savannah, Georgia today. I just have a feeling he is. And the woman said, well, I'm new here, and I'm not supposed to give this without a subpoena, but, just don't tell anyone I told you. And he's going to be there in 2 hours. He's got a 60-pound bag. He's coming back with another victim. And boom, it was like, I couldn't believe it. So I went back into my new boss and I told him, hey, I found him. He's coming back in 2 hours. Then we've got his new phone. We're going to track him. Agents are rolling to the airport. And it was unbelievable. It was really a sweet serendipity, if you will. It was lucky. And I remember thinking, wow, this is how it works. This is how all companies are I'm just going to call and they're supposed to help us. Well, I learned the hard way that I was just very lucky that day, because you don't get that kind of service very often, if ever. So whatever intuition I had was kind of a lucky thing. But like I said, that's an example where that particular call made a difference. And that person, whoever she was, saved the day. And I wish we could have more people that would help like that. So we're really failing at this crisis as a nation, as a world, as a government, as an agency. We're failing. And I won't, I'm not I'm a realist as well. I'm not going to try to say that, oh, we're making progress. I don't think we are. I think we are so far gone. I think the levels of trafficking that I see, just hundreds of victims, it's unbelievable how many I could find. There's so many victims in circulation right now. And the problem is there's so many pimps as well in circulation. So they just keep picking up the next victims and the next one, and they trade them off. So we really need to hold most of all these industry more accountable. The auto industry, for example, is held accountable for safety standards on their cars that they drive. So too should the social media empires be held accountable for keeping children safe on the internet. I think we need an anti-grooming law. We need a slave auction law. We need a 3 strikes felony charge on men buying sex, which is another major problem. Why we are in this mess is the fact that prostitution itself was not enforced for many, many years. And it grew and it grew, and the trafficking grew. And then when it did become enforced, it was very unequally enforced, where, for example, there was one particular county that I studied in New York. This was about in 2010, so a long time ago, but very important that 100 Johns were arrested in 1 year in that particular New York County, and only, 100 prostitutes, females, were arrested, and only 1 John. Okay, so what is that saying to society? It's saying to men that it's okay to buy sex, and the women will go to jail, but the men, it's okay. So we've really made some good changes. I will say that we're trying to go after the demand side more, which I think is encouraging. But part of the reason why human trafficking has grown so much is because of that lack of enforcement and unequal enforcement for so many years. So what I really believe about Irex and their ability to help us rescue children and to reunite families is the fact that this is the most incredible thing I've heard about in my entire career. When Daniel called me and we were talking, I couldn't even believe what I was hearing. And I just thought, I want to get this in every store. I want to get this in every single train, bank, industry. And it would be incredible. And we would identify these victims in real time. We would have all the pictures of all the missing children to be continuously searching these cameras in real time. And who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want, as a company, to be a part of that? To say Walmart helped to reunite families, to say 7-Eleven helped to reunite families, and really, I think a lot of times there is also an award for the tips that you might get. And I think if that camera hit on your store, you should get that reward and definitely that recognition for being part of this incredible mission. So, facial detection through these cameras, imagine if we had them in all the airports, even in all of the trains and all the buses, and we would find so many of these missing children and make so many families reunited again and help rescue these kids before they are trafficked. And like I said, it is very quick that these traffickers prey upon them. Within 48 hours, they are usually picked up. So it is a sense of urgency. But the misconception about the facial recognition in general is the fact that people don't understand the value, and it will actually help to also exonerate the innocent. Okay, so what I mean by that is a lot of times in a missing child case, the suspect is a family member, the suspect is whatever. With the facial detection that Irex could deploy in these surveillance cameras, we could identify who was there with the child. Was it that person? We could see, in real time who it was, and we could actually exonerate innocent people as well. Really, what the greater concern for Congress should be is that the fact that the human eye is much more erroneous than the facial recognition. Facial recognition and AI will actually be a major improvement to our cases. Irex has reported an over 98%, almost a 99% accuracy rate, over 95% accuracy rate with the face mask, which is unbelievable. But Daniel will show us a demo in a minute. Really, what I studied for this presentation is the fact that 80% of eyewitness reports were proven erroneous, where people said they spotted this person and this was the guy. And those cases were actually overturned years later by these erroneous reports. So really, the human eye is what we should be more afraid of. I think AI is really taking the stress off of law enforcement to bring more accuracy. I remember working terrorism cases, very urgent matters, and we had what was called the 3-strike rule. And these were terrorists trying to travel, possible terrorist database matches, trying to travel to the United States. So very urgent situations. And we have what's called the 3-strike rule. So we have to make sure it's the same place, same date of birth, same parents' name, something, 3 of the same, right? That have to match, right? On the traveler and the possible terrorist in the database. So many times the photo was so hard for me to tell, and sometimes they look so close, and it really stressed me out. And I would call the chief watch commander back. There was one watch commander that was really good at, look at the ears, look at the chin, those types of things. But this took a lot of time. You imagine, this Irex, the facial detection, will also save us time. It will bring more confidence. It will take the stress off of, the law enforcement, and also of, putting people in that situation where they have to make that call, because a lot of times the human eye, like I said, and sometimes we disagree. I think it's a match and he doesn't. It is, very debatable, and oftentimes. And law enforcement, we do facial detection every day with our own eyes. So, If my target is Zach Smith and, in a town in Ohio, and I know the age range, I'm going to look for all the Zach Smiths and I'm going to try to compare the photographs, right? So again, the facial recognition is going to bring more accuracy to our cases and also help exonerate innocent people, which is what we want. So when I'm looking at the bigger picture of the human slavery crisis, it has evolved from many different levels. Obviously, globalization, the internet and the darknet, in fact, the socialization and the mob rule, the mob mentality of people on the internet. For example, if you were a pedophile back in 1950, and you wouldn't probably be talking to anybody about that, right? You wouldn't have on the darknet, you have a whole group of people that are not only participating with you, but they're cheering you on and they're telling you how to do it and they're telling you what to do. If you have a fetish for sex with clowns, there is a whole community out there for you cheering you on. So I don't think people understand that the internet and the darknet, these communities are really becoming enterprises. They're becoming businesses for child exploitation. They actually have tutorials that I have seen on the darknet, how to kidnap a child, and they're helping each other do all of these different horrible things, telling each other which route is the best way to traffic somebody. And I love when they say this stuff because I'm documenting it and I'm seeing like their dirty diary because they don't know I'm in there watching. But this is a huge problem. Narcotics addiction is another major part of why the human slavery has gone up. A lot of that is debt bondage. These drug dealers, I noticed that West Virginia, for example, had like a double increase in human trafficking one year. And I thought, how in the world, what's going on in West Virginia? That's really interesting. They don't have any major airport hubs. It's not really a hot spot for this type of activity. And immediately I realized what was going on. They were ravaged by the opioid crisis and had a record numbers of deaths. So I was reading some of the reports, and basically the drug dealer boyfriend pretty soon became their trafficker and said, you need to pay up for these drugs. You're going to have sex for money. You're going to, and it becomes a vicious cycle of drug addiction and trafficking. And so the opioid crisis has killed more Americans than the Iraq and Afghanistan wars combined. And then on top of that, it is my belief that the drug trade, the number one place that these drugs are going are into the bodies of human slaves. I would estimate probably females ages, 17 to 25 who are addicted to drugs, the chance that they are being trafficked or will become trafficked is very high, very tragic. They use drugs to control victims. You're less likely to go to police if you are hooked on drugs. You are dependent on that drug. Therefore, you become dependent on that trafficker. So the drug crisis is incredibly huge. And that's why I am passionate about drug investigations as well. The other problem that I already spoke about was the lack of installed enforcement, not only of human trafficking, but prostitution as well. And the penalties need to be increased. The law has become too reactive instead of proactive. So I really believe technology can overcome if we embrace it for the greater good. And I put up this quote here by Elon Musk, which I really admire, and I admire his work in the AI space. And if Elon's watching, I hope he will join us in the fight. But so I just really appreciate everyone's time today. This is a quote that I added at the end by Harriet Tubman, and this was back in the slave days in America. But she said, "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves." So even back in those times, slave victims tend to not realize, tend to be afraid to be free and to come forward. Fear is the greatest driver of this crime. And that's what we need to do is with Irex, we can find these children. We can get it in every single store, every single place, and get these children rescued. Anyone that would like to contact me, my email is on this slide. I'd be happy to work with you, to collaborate, any ideas you have. I am very much an open book. I love to learn about new technology. And I'm very much supportive of any type of new technology or adventure that you have underway. Thank you all for your time today, and I look forward to hearing from you.